Dr. Vexel stood before the observation window, her four eyes blinking in slow sequence as she watched the human male run on the testing platform below. The creature had been running for 6 hours now. 6 hours without stopping, without collapsing, without giving up. "This is impossible," she said quietly, her translator device converting the clicking sounds of her native language into something the other scientists in the room could understand. Behind her, a dozen researchers from different species watched the same impossible scene. The Korathi delegation had sent their best biologists. The Meccan Empire had contributed their top neural specialists. Even the ancient Civil had emerged from their homeworld to witness this phenomenon. The human's name was Marcus Chen. He was 34 years old, a former soldier from Earth's Northern American region, and he had volunteered for this study when the Galactic Science Council announced their interest in human biology. "His heart rate remains elevated but stable," reported Trix, a Meccan scientist whose mechanical implants whirred softly as he processed the data streaming from the sensors attached to Marcus's body. "His muscles are producing significant amounts of lactic acid, yet he continues to move. By all our calculations, he should have stopped running 4 hours ago." Dr. Vexel turned away from the window and walked to the central display where holographic images of human anatomy rotated slowly. She had spent the last 3 years studying humans, ever since their species made first contact with the galactic community. In that time, she had seen things that challenged everything she thought she knew about biology. "Play back the thermal imaging from the past hour," she ordered. The display shifted to show Marcus's body in shades of red, orange, and yellow. What caught everyone's attention was the steady stream of moisture covering his skin. "They leak," said Counselor Wren, a Civil elder whose ancient body was supported by a hovering chair. "The humans leak water when they exercise. Is this not a critical flaw in their design?" "It appears to be quite the opposite," Dr. Vexel replied. "This process, which humans call sweating, allows them to regulate their internal temperature with remarkable efficiency. Most species would overheat long before reaching this point of exertion. The humans simply release excess heat through their skin." In the testing chamber below, Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and kept running. He was tired. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But he had made a promise to himself before this test began. He would show them what humans could do. The research station orbited a neutral planet called Nexus 7, chosen specifically because it belonged to no species, and served as a meeting ground for scientific cooperation. Marcus had arrived 3 weeks ago, submitted to countless medical scans, blood tests, and physical examinations. He had answered thousands of questions about human culture, history, and biology. But today was different. Today was about endurance. "Dr. Vexel," called out a young Korathi researcher named Silim, "I have completed my analysis of the human historical records. You need to see this." Vexel walked over to Silim's workstation, where images from Earth's past flickered across multiple screens. There were pictures of humans running across vast deserts, humans climbing frozen mountains, humans swimming through rough oceans. "They call this one the Marathon des Sables," Silim explained, pointing to footage of humans running through golden sand dunes. "It is a race covering 250 kilometers across the Sahara Desert. They do this voluntarily, for entertainment." Vexel felt 2 of her hearts skip a beat. 250 kilometers, through a desert. "Yes, and this," Silim continued, pulling up another image, "is something called the Badwater Ultramarathon. It takes place in one of the hottest locations on Earth. The participants run 217 kilometers in temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. "That would kill any Korathi within hours," Counselor Wren observed. "The Meccan would require extensive cooling systems. Even our own kind would struggle greatly." "Yet humans do this by choice," Silim said. "Not for survival, Not because they must. They do it because they want to prove something to themselves. Down in the testing chamber, Marcus had reached the 7-hour mark. His pace had slowed, but he was still moving, still running. His face was red, his breathing heavy, but there was something in his eyes that the alien observers could not quite understand. Determination, pure, stubborn human determination. Dr. Vexel returned to the observation window and pressed her hand against the glass. In her 160 years of scientific study, she had examined over 2,000 different species. She had seen creatures with natural armor that could withstand energy weapons. She had studied beings that could survive in the vacuum of space. She had documented life forms that communicated through colors, through chemicals, through vibrations in the fabric of space itself. But she had never seen anything like humans. "Begin the interview protocol," she said. "I want to speak with him directly." A communication channel opened, and Marcus's voice came through the speakers, slightly breathless but clear. "Still going, Doc. How much longer do you need?" "You have already exceeded our most generous estimates, Marcus. You may stop whenever you wish." "What was your estimate?" Dr. Vexel hesitated. "We predicted 3 hours maximum before complete exhaustion." Marcus laughed, the sound strange and foreign to many of the aliens in the room. 3 hours? Doc, I used to run longer than that just to clear my head. What's my current time? 7 hours and 12 minutes. Let's make it an even 8. That's a nice round number. Vexel muted the channel and turned to her colleagues. "Do you hear that? He chooses to continue. His body is clearly suffering. Our instruments show elevated stress hormones, muscle damage, and significant energy depletion. Yet he speaks of running more as if it is nothing." "Perhaps he is mentally deficient," suggested a Meccan researcher, "unable to properly process pain signals." "No," Vexel said firmly. "We have tested his neural responses extensively. Humans feel pain just as intensely as any other species, perhaps more so. They simply choose to ignore it." The concept was difficult for the assembled scientists to grasp. In most galactic civilizations, pain served as an absolute signal to stop. When a Korathi felt pain, they rested. When a Meccan felt pain, they sought repair. The idea of acknowledging pain and then deliberately continuing despite it was considered irrational at best, insane at worst. Yet here was Marcus Chen, running into his 8th hour, clearly in pain, clearly exhausted, and clearly having no intention of stopping until he reached his arbitrary goal. "I want full access to human historical archives," Dr. Vexel announced. "Everything related to physical endurance, mental resilience, and survival. I want to understand where this trait comes from." "It will take considerable time to translate and analyze all that data," Silim warned. "Then we had better start immediately," Vexel replied, her 4 eyes fixed on the running human below. "Because I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood this species, and if what I suspect is true, we need to revise every assessment the Galactic Council has made about humanity's place in our community." Marcus crossed the 8-hour mark and finally stopped. He bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. Then he straightened up, looked directly at the observation window, and gave a thumbs up. Dr. Vexel did not know what the gesture meant, but she recorded it anyway. Everything about humans needed to be recorded. Everything needed to be studied. Because something told her that the galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about the small, soft, seemingly fragile creatures from a planet called Earth. 3 weeks later, Dr. Vexel had assembled the largest database of human information ever collected by non-human researchers. Her team had worked around the clock, analyzing everything from ancient cave paintings to modern athletic records. What they found disturbed them deeply. "It begins with their evolution," Vexel explained to the assembled scientists in the station's main conference hall. Behind her, holographic displays showed images of early humans hunting on African plains. Unlike most intelligent species, Humans did not evolve with natural weapons. They have no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom. By all metrics, they should have gone extinct millions of years ago. She advanced the display to show a human skeleton compared to those of Earth's predators. They are slower than most prey animals. They are weaker than most predators. Their senses are limited compared to other hunters, yet they became the dominant species on their planet. Do you know how? The room was silent. They walked, Vexel said. They simply walked their prey to death. Confusion spread through the audience. Counselor Wren leaned forward in his hovering chair. Explain. Humans developed a hunting technique called persistence hunting. They would select a prey animal and begin following it. The animal would run away. Humans would follow at a walking pace. The animal would stop to rest. Humans would keep coming. The animal would run again. Humans would keep following. The display showed reconstructions of ancient hunts that could last entire days. Eventually, Vexel continued, the prey animal would collapse from exhaustion and heat stroke. It literally could not run anymore, and the human would simply walk up to it and kill it with a simple weapon. They did not need speed. They did not need strength. They had something far more dangerous. She paused for effect. Patience, endurance, the absolute refusal to quit. Marcus Chen was sitting in the front row of the conference hall, having been invited to provide human perspective on the findings. He smiled when he heard this, recognizing the history his species had almost forgotten. Dr. Vexel is right, he said, standing up. My ancestors hunted by exhausting their prey. We're not the fastest or the strongest, but we can keep going longer than almost anything else on our planet. It's built into our biology. Show them the data, Vexel instructed her team. New displays appeared, showing detailed biological analyses. The human cooling system, their sweating, gives them an enormous advantage in hot environments. Their bipedal stance is remarkably efficient for covering long distances. Their elastic tendons store and release energy with each step. Their slow-twitch muscle fibers are optimized for endurance rather than bursts of speed. But biology alone does not explain everything, Silim added, bringing up new data. We found something in their neural patterns that is even more remarkable. The display shifted to show brain scan taken during Marcus's endurance test. During periods of extreme physical stress, human brains produce a complex mixture of chemicals that allow them to override normal pain responses and continue functioning. They call it the runner's high, or sometimes second wind. It is essentially a self-induced altered state that allows them to push beyond their physical limits. More importantly, Vexel said, they can trigger this response consciously. With training and mental discipline, humans can effectively tell their bodies to shut up and keep going. A mechan scientist raised his mechanical hand. This seems like a dangerous adaptation. Ignoring pain signals could lead to permanent damage or death. It often does, Marcus admitted. Humans have killed themselves through overexertion throughout history. Soldiers have marched until they dropped dead. Athletes have pushed themselves into heart failure. Our refusal to quit is a double-edged sword. Then why do you continue to do it? The mechan asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because sometimes the only way through is forward. Sometimes giving up means dying. And our ancestors survived because they were the ones who never gave up. That trait got passed down to us. It's in our blood, in our bones, in our very souls. Dr. Vexel brought up new displays showing human history. Images of wars, disasters, and catastrophes filled the screens. This is what fascinated me most, she said. Throughout their recorded history, humans have faced extinction-level threats repeatedly. Plagues that killed significant portions of their population. Ice ages that nearly froze their entire planet. Wars that devastated entire continents. Resource collapses that caused widespread starvation. The images were harsh, showing suffering and death on massive scales. By any reasonable analysis, humans should have given up. They should have accepted their fate, like so many other species have done when faced with overwhelming odds. Instead, they did something remarkable. The images shifted to show recovery and rebuilding. They kept going, Vexel said. After every disaster, every war, every plague, they rebuilt. They recovered. They not only survived but came back stronger. They developed new technologies, new medicines, new ways of organizing their society. They took their trauma and transformed it into determination. Marcus nodded slowly. We have a saying on Earth, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's not always literally true, but it captures something important about how we think. We see hardship as a challenge to overcome, not a reason to surrender. This psychological trait appears to be universal among humans, Silim added. Our analysis of human literature, philosophy, and cultural traditions shows that nearly every human society has developed similar concepts. The idea that suffering can be transformed into strength, that persistence will eventually be rewarded, that surrender is the only true failure. Counselor Wren's ancient eyes studied Marcus with new interest. You do not fear death. We absolutely fear death, Marcus replied honestly. We just fear giving up more. The conference hall was silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Vexel saved her most important finding for last. There is one more thing you all need to understand, she said. Humans do not only apply this endurance to physical challenges, they apply it to everything. New displays showed human accomplishments across various fields, scientific breakthroughs that took decades of failed experiments, artistic masterpieces created through years of practice, social movements that persisted for generations. When humans decide they want something, they do not stop until they get it or they die trying. They will work at a problem for years, for decades, for their entire lives. They will pass their goals to their children, who will pass them to their children. They think in terms of generations when necessary. The implications for galactic politics are significant, Silim said quietly. Yes, Vexel agreed. Which is why I called this assembly. Humanity has only been part of our galactic community for 7 years. In that time, they have already established trade relationships with 42 species, built 3 orbital stations, and begun colonizing 2 new planets. That is an aggressive expansion rate, a Korathi diplomat observed. And they show no signs of slowing down, Vexel confirmed. Our models suggest that at their current rate, humans will be one of the 5 most influential species in the galaxy within 200 years. The room erupted in concerned murmurs. We are not here to discuss whether this is a threat, Vexel said firmly, quieting the crowd. We are here to understand it, and what I want you all to understand is this. You cannot outlast humanity. You cannot wait for them to give up, to get tired, to lose interest. That is not how they work. Marcus stood again, drawing all attention. Dr. Vexel is right, and I want to add something. We're not looking for conflict. Humans have finally reached the stars, and we want to be good neighbors. We want to trade, to learn, to share what we have, but we will not be pushed around. We will not be bullied, and we will not give up on our place in this galaxy. Is that a threat? Someone asked. It's a fact, Marcus replied simply. Treat us fairly and we'll be the best friends you ever had. We'll work alongside you for centuries, helping you build whatever you want to build. But try to hold us back, try to keep us down, and we'll keep coming. Forever, because that's what humans do. Dr. Vexel looked around the room at the faces of scientists from 100 different worlds. I suggest, she said carefully, that we all take this information very seriously. The years that followed changed everything. Dr. Vexel's research was published and distributed throughout the galaxy. For the first time, alien civilizations had a scientific framework for understanding the strange persistence of humanity. Some species were frightened by what they learned. Others were fascinated. A few were inspired. Marcus Chen became something of a celebrity, the human who had run for 8 hours straight while a dozen species watched in disbelief. He was invited to speak at universities and research institutions across the galaxy. Everywhere he went, he told the same story. "We're not special because we're strong," he would say. "We're not special because we're smart or fast or powerful. We're special because we don't know how to quit. We literally evolved to keep going when everything tells us to stop. That's our gift. That's our curse. That's what makes us human." 5 years after the original study, Dr. Vexel proposed a new experiment. She wanted to test human endurance in a broader context, not just physical ability. She wanted to understand how humans handled prolonged psychological stress, extended isolation, and seemingly impossible problems. The Galactic Science Council agreed to fund the research. And so, a new facility was built on a remote moon, specifically designed to test the limits of human mental endurance. Marcus volunteered again. So did 50 other humans from different nations, different cultures, different backgrounds. They were teachers and soldiers, artists and engineers, young and old. The only thing they had in common was their species and their willingness to push their limits. The tests began simply enough. Subjects were given complex puzzles that had no clear solution and asked to work on them until they chose to give up. Korathi subjects typically surrendered within a few hours. Meccan subjects used logical analysis and stopped when they determined the problem was unsolvable. Civil subjects meditated on the puzzle and eventually declared it beyond their understanding. The humans kept working. Days passed, then weeks. The human subjects rotated through sleep cycles, taking breaks to eat and rest, but always returning to their puzzles. They tried different approaches. They collaborated with each other. They failed repeatedly and kept trying. What drives them? A young Korathi researcher asked Dr. Vexel as they watched the humans work. "Watch their faces," Vexel replied. "See how they react when they fail." The researcher looked more closely at the monitoring screens. He saw humans frowning in frustration, sighing in disappointment, occasionally cursing in their various languages. But he also saw something else. "They're smiling," he said in confusion. "Some of them are smiling when they fail." "Yes," Vexel confirmed. "This is something I have spent years trying to understand. Humans seem to find satisfaction in the struggle itself, not just the outcome. They enjoy the process of trying even when they fail, perhaps especially when they fail." That makes no logical sense. No, it does not, and yet it is demonstrably true. In the testing chamber, a human woman named Elena had been working on the same puzzle for 18 days. She had filled dozens of notebooks with calculations, diagrams, and theories. Her approach had evolved from mathematical analysis to creative experimentation to what she called intuitive guessing. On day 19, she solved it. The Galactic Science Council was stunned. The puzzle had been specifically designed to be unsolvable using known methods. It was supposed to test how long humans would persist before accepting defeat. Instead, Elena had invented a new mathematical framework that made the solution possible. She had created new knowledge simply because she refused to accept that the problem could not be solved. Dr. Vexel interviewed her immediately afterward. "You believe the puzzle had a solution?" Vexel asked. Elena shook her head. "No, I thought it was probably impossible after the first week. The math just didn't work." "Then why did you keep trying?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Because I wanted to know for sure. I wanted to exhaust every possibility before I admitted defeat. And somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to solve their puzzle and started trying to solve my puzzle. Does that make sense?" "Not entirely," Vexel admitted. Elena smiled. "I got stubborn. The puzzle became personal. It wasn't about proving something to you anymore. It was about proving something to myself. I had to know whether I could do it, even if no one else ever had." "And if you had failed?" Then I would have known that I gave it everything I had. That would have been enough. Vexil recorded every word, adding it to her growing database of human psychology. The more she learned about humans, the more she realized how fundamentally different they were from every other species she had studied. Most intelligent species in the galaxy had evolved past the need for such stubborn persistence. They had developed sophisticated cultures, advanced technologies, and comfortable lives that rarely required pushing through extreme adversity. When they encountered obstacles, they typically found ways around them, or they accepted that some things were simply not possible. Humans had developed all those things too, but they had never lost their ancient programming for persistence. Somewhere deep in their genetic code, in the wiring of their brains, in the stories they told their children, humans still carried the legacy of ancestors who had survived by never giving up. It made them unpredictable, it made them dangerous, but it also made them remarkable. Dr. Vexil completed her second major study and presented her findings to the Galactic Council. Humans will attempt the impossible, she told the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds. Not because they expect to succeed, not because they have calculated the odds and found them favorable. They will attempt the impossible simply because they refuse to accept that anything is truly beyond their reach. This could lead to wasted resources, a Korathi diplomat pointed out, pursuing goals that cannot be achieved. Sometimes, yes, Vexil agreed. Humans often fail. They fail more than most species because they attempt more than most species, but occasionally they succeed at things we thought could never be done, and when that happens, everything changes. She brought up images of human history again, focusing on their technological development. In less than 100 years, humans went from their first powered flight to walking on their moon. They developed vaccines for diseases that had killed millions. They created global communication networks that connect billions of individuals. They did all of this despite countless experts telling them it could not be done. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My recommendation, Dr. Vexil concluded, is that we stop trying to predict what humans can and cannot achieve. Every time we set limits for them, they exceed those limits. Instead, we should focus on building relationships with them, on becoming partners rather than observers. You suggest we ally ourselves with this species, a Meccan representative asked. I suggest we not make enemies of them, Vexil replied. Because if there is one thing my research has taught me, it is this. You do not want humans working against you. Their persistence is a force of nature. Properly directed, it could benefit the entire galaxy. Opposed, it could become a threat unlike anything we have ever faced. The Council voted to increase diplomatic ties with humanity. New trade agreements were signed. Joint research projects were established. Cultural exchange programs brought humans to alien worlds and aliens to Earth. And slowly, the galaxy began to understand what Dr. Vexil had discovered in her research station. Watching a single human run for 8 hours simply because he refused to stop. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the smartest, the fastest, or the most powerful, but they were the most persistent. And in the grand scope of cosmic time, persistence was perhaps the most valuable trait of all. 20 years passed since Dr. Vexil's first study, and the galaxy had transformed. Humans had spread to 37 different star systems, establishing colonies, research outposts, and trading hubs. They had formed alliances with over 100 species, participated in dozens of joint scientific ventures, and contributed significantly to galactic culture and technology. But it was the crisis on Velen 4 that truly demonstrated what Dr. Vexil's research had predicted. Velen 4 was a small planet in the outer regions of explored space, home to a peaceful agricultural species called the Veloni. When a massive asteroid was detected on a collision course with their world, the galactic community rallied to help. The problem was simple. The asteroid was too large to destroy and too massive to deflect using conventional means. Mathematical models showed that any attempt to divert it would require more energy than all the ships in the region could produce together. The Galactic Science Council declared the situation hopeless. Evacuation efforts began, but there were not enough ships to save everyone. Millions of Veloni faced certain death. Dr. Vexel was consulting with the evacuation committee when the human delegation arrived. Leading them was Marcus Chen, now 54 years old and serving as Earth's ambassador to the outer regions. "We have a proposal," Marcus said, placing a data crystal on the table. The holographic display showed detailed engineering schematics for a device that had never been built before, a massive network of connected deflector units that would work together to generate a single, enormous push. "This is theoretical technology," a mechan engineer said after reviewing the plans. "It has never been tested. The calculations alone would take years to complete properly." "We don't have years," Marcus replied. "We have 6 months until impact. That's why we're not going to wait for perfect calculations. We're going to build it, test it, and adjust as we go." That approach has a high probability of failure, higher than the probability of saving everyone through evacuation. The mechan paused, unable to argue with the logic. "We're asking for help," Marcus continued, looking around the room at representatives from dozens of species. "We need engineers, scientists, resources, and ships. We need everyone who can contribute to put aside their doubts and work on this project. We know it might not succeed, but we believe it's worth trying." "And if it fails?" Counselor Wren asked. The ancient Civil had followed Dr. Vexel's research closely for 2 decades and had developed a particular interest in human psychology. "Then at least we'll know we did everything possible," Marcus said. "That matters to us. I know it might not make sense to you, but humans need to try. We need to exhaust every option before we accept defeat. It's just how we're built." Dr. Vexel spoke up. "I have spent 20 years studying humans. In that time, I have learned to trust their instincts about their own capabilities. If they believe this is possible, I think we should listen." The debate continued for hours, but eventually, the council voted to support the human proposal. Resources began flowing to Velen 4 from across the galaxy. What followed was the largest cooperative engineering project in galactic history. Human engineers worked alongside Korathi physicists, mechan robotics experts, civil theorists, and specialists from 100 other species. They worked around the clock, sleeping in shifts, pushing themselves to their limits and beyond. The project faced setback after setback. Prototype deflector units failed during testing. Calculations proved wrong and had to be redone. Supply chains broke down, and critical components arrived late or damaged. Through it all, the humans kept pushing forward. When problems arose, they found solutions. When solutions failed, they found new solutions. They refused to consider the possibility of giving up. Their attitude infected the other species working on the project. Korathi engineers who would normally have rested began working extended shifts. Mechan specialists bypassed their usual methodical approaches in favor of rapid experimentation. Even the ancient Civil seemed energized by the human determination around them. Dr. Vexel observed it all from the project's command center, documenting everything for her ongoing research. "You predicted this," Counselor Wren said to her one evening, as they watched human and alien workers installing deflector units on the asteroid's surface. "Years ago, you said humans would attempt the impossible and sometimes succeed." "I also said their persistence could change the galaxy," Vexel replied. "I think we are witnessing that change right now." "You think they will succeed?" Vexel watched the display showing the asteroid growing slowly larger in Velen 4 sky. The planet had only 3 weeks left. "I think they will not stop trying," she said, "and I have learned never to underestimate what that means." The final week was chaos. The deflector network was only 80% complete when the window for activation arrived. Human engineers argued furiously about whether to wait for full completion or activate what they had. Marcus made the call. "We go with what we have. Waiting means losing everything. We've done enough. We have to trust our work." The activation sequence began. For 12 hours, nothing seemed to happen. The asteroid continued on its collision course, seemingly unaffected by the massive energy being directed at it. Some species began to lose hope. The Korathi delegation prepared evacuation shuttles. The Meccan representatives started calculating alternative outcomes. Even some humans began to doubt. But the core team kept working, making adjustments, redirecting power, refusing to accept failure. In hour 13, the asteroid's trajectory shifted by 1/10 of a degree. It was not enough to save the planet, but it was proof that the system worked. Over the next 3 days, the team made continuous adjustments, squeezing every bit of efficiency from their incomplete network. The asteroid's path bent gradually, painfully slowly, but it bent. In the final hours before impact, the asteroid passed through Velen 4 atmosphere, close enough to cause massive windstorms but not close enough to cause destruction. It continued past the planet and disappeared into deep space. Velen 4 survived. The celebration that followed lasted for days. The Veloni declared a permanent holiday in honor of their saviors. Statues were erected on every continent showing humans and aliens working together. Songs were written about the project that had defied the odds. Dr. Vexil published her final paper on human endurance, using the Velen 4 crisis as the central case study. "Humans did not save Velen 4 because they were superior beings," she wrote. "They saved it because they refused to accept that it could not be saved. Their persistence created possibilities that our calculations could not predict. They bent the curve of probability through sheer force of will." But the most important lesson of Velen 4 was not about human capabilities. It was about what happens when human persistence spreads to others. When faced with a human who refuses to quit, other species find themselves unable to quit as well. The human spirit of determination appears to be contagious. This may be humanity's greatest contribution to our galaxy. Not their technology, not their resources, not their military strength, but their example. They teach us that limits are often illusions. They show us that failure is only final when we stop trying. They remind us that the impossible is simply the untested. Marcus Chen read Dr. Vexil's paper from his quarters on the diplomatic station where he now lived permanently. He was 60 years old, gray-haired and tired, but still working, still pushing, still refusing to slow down. "She gives us too much credit," he told his wife Sarah, who had joined him in space 10 years earlier. "We just did what humans do." "That's exactly her point," Sarah replied. "What humans do is remarkable. You've spent so long being human that you've forgotten how special it is." Marcus looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Veloni were rebuilding their world, grateful to be alive. Somewhere else, new human colonies were being established, new frontiers being explored. Across the galaxy, species were learning from human example, pushing themselves harder, reaching further, refusing to accept the limits they had always assumed were real. "You know what I remember most about that first experiment," Marcus said. "Dr. Vexil's face when I kept running past her predictions. She couldn't believe it. She thought I was broken or crazy." "What changed her mind?" "She realized I wasn't broken. I was just human. And there's nothing more human than looking at a wall and thinking, I bet I can get past that." Sarah smiled and took his hand. "So what wall are you thinking about now?" Marcus pointed to a distant star cluster visible through the window. "They say nothing lives out there. Too remote, too dangerous, no resources worth the journey. Everyone's written it off as impossible to colonize." Everyone except humans. Everyone except humans. Dr. Vexel's research continued for another 30 years, until her own species' natural lifespan finally caught up with her. In her final paper, written on her deathbed, she offered one last observation. "I have spent my life studying humans," she wrote. "I have watched them run when they should have collapsed, fight when they should have surrendered, hope when they should have despaired. I have seen them fail 1,000 times and succeed once, celebrating that single success as if the failures never happened. For a long time, I tried to understand this species through biology, through psychology, through mathematical models and scientific analysis. I measured their hormones, mapped their neural pathways, calculated their metabolic efficiency. But in the end, I think I missed the most important thing. Humans are not remarkable because of what they are. They are remarkable because of what they believe. They believe that effort matters. They believe that persistence is its own reward. They believe that the only true failure is giving up. These beliefs are not rational. They cannot be proven. They do not always lead to success, but they create a species that will never stop trying. And in a universe full of challenges, a species that never stops trying will eventually accomplish things that seem impossible. When I first met Marcus Chen, I thought I was studying an interesting biological specimen. I did not realize I was meeting the future. Humans will inherit this galaxy, not because they deserve it, not because they are entitled to it, but because they will simply refuse to accept any other outcome. They will work and push and struggle and fail and try again forever, until they get what they want. And the rest of us will either join them or watch from the sidelines as they reshape the universe. I choose to join them. I recommend everyone else do the same. Dr. Vexel died peacefully, surrounded by colleagues and students from a dozen species. Her research archive was preserved in the Great Library of Nexus 7, available to any being who wanted to understand the strange, persistent, never-quitting creatures from Earth. And across the galaxy, humans kept running, kept working, kept pushing forward. Because that was what humans did. Because that was who humans were. Because in their blood and bones and souls, they carried the legacy of ancestors who had survived ice ages and plagues and wars, and every other catastrophe their brutal planet could throw at them. They carried the spirit of persistence. They carried the refusal to quit. They carried the impossible, stubborn, beautiful conviction that no matter how hard things got, no matter how bad the odds, no matter how certain the defeat, it was always worth trying. It was always worth hopping. It was always worth running just a little bit farther.